Hey, podcast listeners, Fawaz Mufti here from Westchester Medical Center, New York Medical College, and this is another episode of the Neurocritical Care podcast. In fact, you're in for a treat. This is the first of our series on the nuts and bolts of neurocritical care, the Master Series. Not infrequently, I find myself wondering, is it worth it? The voice of one of my good friends and mentors resonates in my head when he says, guys, what are we doing here? I struggle figuring out when is a case futile. When do you throw the towel in? 7 days, a month, never? We frequently try to make decisions to help our patients based on our best understanding of their individual underlying pathophysiology and the degree of brain damage. But the question to you, listener, is how often have you been wrong? I will confess that there are multiple instances where I've been humbled by a patient's recovery against all odds. We strive daily to weigh the pros and the cons or consequences of any clinical decision we make. In 2019, the NCS launched the Curing Coma campaign as its signature clinical, scientific, and public health effort. The Curing Coma campaign is the first global public health initiative to tackle the unifying concept of coma as a treatable medical entity. By understanding the biology of coma and involving everyone engaged in the care of the coma patients, from doctors to scientists, long-term caregivers, industry, regulatory agencies, patients' families, and even the recovered patients, we can support and collaborate to come up with a unified approach to disorders of consciousness, resulting in improved patient outcomes. I'm thrilled to welcome a pioneer and founding father of neurocritical care, Claude Hemphill III, professor of neurology at Zuckerberg San Francisco General Hospital, University of California, San Francisco. Claude, welcome back to the Neurocritical Care Society podcast.
Thanks, Fawaz. It's great to be here.
So we've undoubtedly come a long way as far as like our understanding of coma. There's still a lot that we don't understand, and a lot of knowledge our knowledge as far as like it remains limited as far as like the overall care of comatose patients. From a clinical perspective, we're very familiar with the early stages of coma management. We often don't observe or fully understand the trajectory of recovery in rehab and the home care environment. So how we practice neurocritical care of the comatose patient, prediction, prognostication, my opinion, and I apologize about if I offend people, but I believe it's an imprecise science. Understanding the trajectory, in my opinion, is the key to improving our ability to identify who will recover. I wonder, from your perspective, Claude, how do you strive to understand this trajectory, and how do we understand how can we as a master neurointensivist, how do you identify who you believe is going to be the patient we're going to go full court press and we're going to help? Is there any way to predict for some of the more junior listeners?
Well, you really articulated the conundrum in which we find ourselves in, and I think the humility with which you describe that is exactly why the Curing Coma campaign came about. I'm actually going to take a step back and talk a little bit about the genesis of the campaign, because it came out of our 2018 Neurocritical Care Society strategic planning meeting at the annual meeting in Boca Raton, in which we were really looking at the current state and the future of the science of neurocritical care and how the Neurocritical Care Society could specifically make a difference. And the theme of that meeting was Blue Ocean. And that's a business concept, meaning uncontested market space. And so when we thought about what neurocritical care research was lacking and where we could make a big difference, really the recognition was that, as you said, we as providers at the bedside, whether it's physicians, nurses, pharmacists, respiratory therapists, occupational rehab therapists, physical therapists, so forth, we see these patients every day with disordered consciousness. And it's a theme across different diseases. And so that's really the genesis of the grand challenge of the Curing Coma campaign. And the idea that coma or disordered consciousness is a blue ocean is sort of stunning, I would say. And what it shows is the lack of attention to this as a discrete entity. And if there are three words that I would describe the current state of coma care acutely, sort of, I would say, perhaps not in your ICU, but in general, I think I'd say pessimism, inaccuracy, and diffusion. And what I mean by that is there is a tendency often to start from a assumption of inability to recover and almost have the patient, that patient has proved to us that they're going to recover. Wow, did we see a little bit more eye-opening, a little bit more interaction? Well, that's going to embolden us to continue care. But we're starting from that. And that's why Awakening Hope is the tagline of the Curing Coma campaign, to shift that narrative to one of starting with optimism and opportunity of possibility. I think inaccuracy, as you described, why are you surprised when you were wrong? I mean, the reason you're surprised when you were wrong is we've gone on the assumption that the existing tools that we have to describe coma clinically and prediction models and so forth are accurate, and that when we're wrong, it's somehow an outlier. And that's probably because we're not adequately characterizing the science. And that's probably the difference between phenotype and endotype. And so phenotype is what somebody looks like, and endotype is perhaps simply put why they look that way. And so we have historically, understandably, described coma and disordered consciousness with phenotype. And we've relied on the neurologic exam, which tells us very accurately what somebody looks like at the time, but it doesn't always tell us. In fact, it doesn't really inherently tell us the capacity for recovery. And then diffusion, what I mean by that is, one, the care or the treatment of disordered consciousness has sort of been embedded largely in the treatment of individual diseases. So if we treat stroke, is that going to improve their outcome, which will be related to consciousness and other factors, TBI, cardiac arrest, and so forth. But one of the I guess I would say the hypotheses of the Curing Coma campaign is that there are common mechanisms that relate to the underlying endotype that may be disease independent, but define the ability for us to intervene and patients to recover. But the other diffusion comment goes to a comment that you made about, we see these folks acutely, and we are often opining on how they're going to do long term. And we're using that in counseling families, sometimes patients, but often families, on decisions to continue care. But we as a field have not really been engaged with our post-acute providers. And I'm going to say, I feel like it's a little bit of hubris on my part when I am telling people how it's going to turn out, but I don't see patients like that in that state, or I don't interact intensively with my post-acute or rehabilitation providers. And part of the Curing Coma campaign has been to bring together rehabilitation and recovery specialists, consciousness scientists, as well as neurointensivists for this. So that's a really long answer, but that is now sort of the framework in which I go into the very practical situation of a patient and realize that we have to make decisions now, but this better not be as good as it gets for the future of the science of the field.
I completely agree, and I really hope not. So no question that this is an exhilarating time to be in neurocritical care. Tremendous progress in research, education, patient quality, advocacy, training. And I love that you started talking about why neurocritical, why the Curing Coma campaign came to be. But can you describe in your own words what coma means to you?
So I may get in trouble here because I would say there are coma lumpers and there are coma splitters. And I think that precision in diagnosis is obviously very important. And the definition that we've used for coma previously has been someone who is unresponsive to external stimuli. And so when we talk about the Curing Coma campaign, though, we're really talking about coma writ large. We're talking about disordered consciousness across that spectrum. And one of the first studies that we've done through the Curing Coma campaign was the Come Together survey, which was a provider survey to ask providers, first of all, what methodologies, clinical or technological, that they use to evaluate patients with coma, but also what they define coma as. If someone has their eyes closed, but they reach up to and localize, is that a coma? Or is that severe stupor? We are still sort of discussing this in terms of a nomenclature, and I think that's important. I think that my hope is that is ultimately replaced by an endotype definition of consciousness. Once again, I say I may get in trouble because I call that patient comatose. I call that patient comatose because from a pragmatic standpoint, they have a severe disordered consciousness that is impairing their ability to interact with the external world around them.
So on that same note, the reason that question came to mind is At some point, when the Cure in Coma campaign was launched at that meeting, this thing went viral on social media. They went around asking people, just putting them on the spot, like, what does coma mean to you? And one question that like one response that actually like I was extremely impressed by was, I think somebody was in a cab asking the cab driver, and they asked him, they're like, what does cure in coma mean to you? And actually his response was like very astute. And if I recall correctly, it was something along the lines of hope. And I was like blown away. I was like, how did this person answer? Like, it was such a smart answer. So the question for like, I mean, with almost 70% of all traumatic brain injuries, let's just take that as a cause of trauma. 70% of death in early trauma, like brain injuries, occur in the early stages as a result of like withdrawal of care, which could be premature in some cases. And like a good friend of mine, Saif Izzy, called this medical nihilism or a self-fulfilling prophecy. One would assume that the patient has poor outcome, they end up dying due to withdrawal of care. Sure, you're right? Because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. But this is a slippery slope, and we're all shaped by our experiences. So how do you avoid pessimism? How do you associate coma with hope?
So when you have your stories of your story of hope, or your coma super save, as Stephen Mayer likes to put it, you're not alone, and we all have those stories. And those stories are both emboldening and empowering, but they're humbling and I would say unnerving. And so the concern for the self-fulfilling prophecy is real, and we know that it permeates across all neurocritical care conditions. I think that none of us are naive to think that in the current situation, all coma is curable. I'm showing my age, but I remember when I was a neurology resident and we started treating stroke, or we would have a patient, we would have an acute stroke patient, and we would, quote, treat them. But the reality is we started from a view of pessimism. We started from a view of that, there's nothing really we can do for stroke. We can figure out the cause, try to prevent the next one. And that was all we really had. And that was the approach. Now, with stroke, we always sort of start from an assumption, certainly ischemic stroke, start from an assumption of optimism or potential treatability, and then we work back from that. It turns out that this is not a patient that is appropriate for thrombectomy because of the following, and so forth. And so that's part of what I mean by shifting the narrative. This intersects so importantly with ethics and with family communication and shared decision making and so forth. But I think that probably the biggest disservice that we have done has been the sense that we can precisely and accurately determine long-term outcome with regard to a range of outcomes early on. One of the things that I think we're not too bad at, and some of the studies that have tried to look at early prediction by neurointensivists, we're not too bad at sort of getting a sense of trajectory. What's it going to take to get there? Is this somebody who's going to be awake and walking around at 7 days? Or is this somebody who we're not sure, and let's see what things look like at 6 months or a year? And it's going to take a lot of effort to get there. I think we're not terrible at that, but I think that's a different type of prognostication. And I've been surprised at how rarely that is been considered when we talk about prognostication in neurocritical care conditions. It's more like, are they going to live or die? Should we withdraw support? As opposed to, are they going to be walking at 4 months? Are they going to be walking at 8 months? What are we going to need to be doing in terms of family support, considering finances, considering so forth? Those are more complex issues, but those are the lives that our patients and their families lead.
Oh, you're absolutely correct. Absolutely. So, like on that note, without a crystal ball, like nobody can predict what the patient's going to look like in 3, 6 months, or even a year after the onset of coma. And as I'm sure you agree, coma is not like one size fits all. Everybody's different. So, how do you prognosticate in your clinical practice? EEG, functional imaging? Do you look at blood-based biomarkers? A combination of the above? How do you do it?
So, I actually start clinically and utilize, I think it's fine to very carefully utilize baseline severity scores as a way to consider sort of the framework of where you're starting, whether it's the impact score in TBI or the ICH score, the max ICH score, or other models. I think it's actually okay. The damage that comes is when folks take the point estimates from those and think that they are reality, when they're really models that are confounded by a lot of other issues like the self-fulfilling prophecy or something, other issues like that. Plus, they all have confidence intervals that we often don't acknowledge, and that's sort of the inherent uncertainty that exists. But I think that really provides us with an initial framework, and you can kind of get a sense of that baseline severity, and I think that's important. I am not yet using a machine learning quantitative EEG or functional MRI, partly because I just haven't figured out how to operationalize that yet. But I've got to tell you, I'm working on it. And I think we all need to be, because I think these are the work that Jan Clausen did and published in his New England Journal paper over 2 years ago now, that looked at cognitive motor dissociation. I think was extremely powerful. Adrian Owen and Stephen Laures and their work in the post-acute phase, looking at PET and functional MRI. I think this is getting at that underlying issue of patients who have covert consciousness, and they have a much higher likelihood of recovery. So if I'm not using those, it needs to be because I haven't quite figured out how to operationalize it. And I've got to incorporate that uncertainty in my decision-making and my counseling for patients and their families, as opposed to just saying, well, they look bad, I don't have a functional MRI, therefore it's going to be bad.
So what lessons have we learned at this point regarding what works and what doesn't work, and what should we consider incorporating in our practice in the future? If you were to design a clinical trial to help boost the Curing Coma campaign's mission forward, how would that look like? What are the potential challenges we face, and what time frame do we envision this, if ever, that this would occur?
Well, I think it certainly will occur. And one of the things that we have ongoing, our prospective studies module is actually working right now on designing and implementing, hopefully beginning this year, a prospective study that's probably an observational study of disordered consciousness in the neuro ICU. And part of that is really to understand and better characterize a trajectory, because as you know, it is surprising how few longitudinal studies we have. And those longitudinal studies have tended to be, when they are robust, they've tended to be only involving patients that are able to go into acute rehabilitation, such as in the TBI model systems or something like that. A lot of great data from that, but there's a lot of missing information. So I think, first of all, we need the observational study. We need to characterize the patients that we're seeing, and we need to understand a number of the other different predictors, their ongoing care and their ongoing trajectory. But I think that what the future should hold, and sort of a second tier of studies, is going to be using different, biomarkers that would investigate endotype. And so I think more multi-center use of functional MRI and diffusion tensor imaging, machine learning, quantitative EEG, and also the clinical tools that are starting to come out. Very intrigued at the study that came out about a year ago that looked at this sniff test. So a clinical test that would evaluate patients who may have improved ability to recover from disordered consciousness. And so I don't think it's all going to be high tech, but I think that implementing these more widely is going to be a big part of the studies that we do. The goal of this is twofold. One is to identify those patients in the existing current situation that have covert consciousness, cognitive motor dissociation, and therefore higher likelihood of recovery, even though we couldn't tell based on their phenotype. But the other really is to target specific mechanisms with interventions. And that's where we got to go. That's really where we've got to go. But we've got to start with these observational studies and broader work with the biomarkers. And when we laid out our scientific advisory council 3 pillars of curing coma, it's endotype, endotyping, biomarkers, and then proof of concept clinical trials. An example of this that's pretty cool is Brian Edlow at Mass General has an NIH grant to do a pilot study called STIMPACT, where he's basically looking at patients who have intact thalamocortical connections after TBI and targeting methylphenidate as a dopamine agonist. And this is I think this is sort of the the progress of where we see ourselves. And, you know, it's impatient because we want to do something now. We want to solve the problem now. We laid out a 10-year roadmap, a scientific roadmap 2 years ago for the Curing Coma campaign that sort of went through all of this. And we're well on that. But I am reminded about the successes of acute ischemic stroke and where we were. And that while that took time, we're just in such a different place now. And so that's where we got to go.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Wow, that's excellent. Very well said. So finally, I want to spend a few moments talking about the World Coma Day, and which I believe is on March 22nd. What do you guys have planned? And is there anything else you want to tell us about the Curing Coma campaign?
So World Coma Day started out as an idea for a research day. And many of us remember the Prince study that we did a few years ago as a point prevalence study through the Neurocritical Care Society, point prevalence of sort of a day in the life of neurocritical care, what's going on, what do our patients look like, what treatments are they receiving, and so forth. So the idea was to have World Coma Day as a day where we would do a point prevalence study, and it would be a research day. And then COVID happened, and we had to push that off. And so we thought, well, wait a minute, why don't we just have our own holiday? We'll create World Coma Day, and it will be more than just that. Not that just that is not enough, but it will be more than that. It'll be a day where we can actually leverage the fact that we use Zoom and other virtual platforms to actually bring together folks in a day of increasing awareness of coma as a treatable entity, as a community building opportunity, as a science dissemination opportunity, and as a way to kind of provide neurocritical care units, research units, rehab units as an opportunity to give a shout out of what they're doing and kind of what coma means to them. So that's what World Coma Day was last year, and that's what it is this year. It's really designed to be a celebration, serious, but also enjoyable. So that's why we've designed it as a free 24-hour virtual event. Starts at midnight on the 22nd Greenwich Mean Time. And so, you know, you have to adjust your calendar for whatever that means. For some folks, it starts on the 21st, obviously. And then it rotates and goes for 24 hours. Folks can get on at any point, register ahead of time through the Curing Coma website and the World Coma Day website. And what folks are going to hear is they're going to hear scientific updates, discussions and debates that moderators will help lead, stories of hope from patients and families, and shout outs from other ICUs. And one of the things that I really enjoyed at last year's World Coma Day was to see the names. We had about 1,400 people register last year, which is pretty good, and for a first time. And to see the names of the participants that were on, and see how the names changed as we run around the globe. And some folks came back, and you can come back any time. But it really showed that we have a community out. And the key parts of the Curing Coma campaign are advancing the science and building the community. And I think that's how we're going to make a difference. So get together, get on when you can. I'm going to encourage folks several ways that they can participate in addition to being on and being part of the discussions is be an ambassador, be a World Coma Day ambassador. On the Curing Coma website, it shows what the ambassador packet is, how to increase outreach, and how to get more folks to be part of World Coma Day. And shout outs. We had about 30 shout outs from various ICUs and rehab units and research units last year that we worked into the meeting, and these were 1 to 4 minute. You guys did one, and it was just very, very cool because it shows that anybody can participate. And I think that's one of the key lessons. We're not the only ones to call a grand challenge a moonshot, but we're calling the Curing Coma campaign a moonshot. And it's because it's worth doing. It is a grand challenge, but also it's a recognition that estimates something like it took 400,000 people to put a man on the moon, put a person on the moon in various aspects. And there were only 3 astronauts, and only 2 of them landed on the moon. but there were an awful lot of folks that figured out how to keep them alive and how to get the rockets up there and how to bring them back and how to get them out of the, you know the story. That's what we need. Everybody actually has a place to play in the Curing Coma campaign. If you're a consciousness scientist that's looking at PET scanning and post-acute minimally conscious patients, you've got a role to play. If you're a nurse at the bedside who takes care of these patients and wants things to be better for your patient, you're part of the Curing Coma campaign. So we are encouraging folks to go to the website and not only sign up for World Coma Day, but sign up to be a Curing Coma collaborator. And all that means is you're part of the Curing Coma campaign, you're going to get updates, and when opportunities for things like World Coma Day come around, or research studies, symposia, you're going to get notified and you're going to be part of it. So there's a lot folks can do.
Well, first of all, I absolutely loved World Coma Day last year, and I'm thrilled to hopefully be able to serve as an ambassador and raise awareness about World Coma Day. As you were talking, I would love to see maybe we can actually do it as a promotional video, a time lapse of the names changing, because it really highlights like a Zoom, like that Zoom column with all the names. It really highlights how many people are actually part of this. Claude, thank you very much for everything you do. You're a trailblazer. If we're able to see farther, it's because we're standing on shoulders of giants, and you are, my friend, one of those giants. Thank you so much for everything you do for neurocritical care, for our patients, for all your trainees. I mean this from the bottom of my heart. I'm a true fan.
Well, you're very kind. I think when we created the Neurocritical Care Society back in 2001, we knew we were onto something special, and it has just grown and continued. And the mission, the commitment to mission of folks like yourself and other NCS members is really what makes this a success. So thank you. It continues to inspire.
Thank you very much. Again, it was great to see you. To our listeners, I hope you enjoy this episode. Again, the first of our series of talks on the nuts and bolts of neurocritical care, the Masters series. Thank you very much, Claude, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
My pleasure.
All right, take care.
Thanks for listening to the NCS podcast. The NCS podcast is produced by the Neurocritical Care Society, whose mission is to promote quality patient care, professional collaboration, research, training, education, and advocacy in neurocritical care. Our production staff includes Tariq El-Maghribi, Andrew Barishmet, Leonid Groisman, Atul Kalanuria, Lauren Kaufman, Cassie Cronfield, Holly Ledyard, Lindsay Marchetti, Alexander Reynolds, Lucia Rivera-Lara, John Rosenberg, Jason Siegel, Zachary Threkold, Teddy Yoon, and Chris Zaman. Our administrative staff and senior producer is Bronnie Rousseau. Music by Mohan Kadapali from the University of Miami Division of Neurocritical Care. If you like our show and want to learn more about us, check us out on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn. The NCS podcast is available on NCS On Demand, iTunes, and wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Fawaz Al-Mufti, and thanks for listening.